But isn't it just wonderful to not have to worry about freeze framing and pixelation and all that, because we're all real, we're all here together. I did, mind you, Dave, I did last night at the bar, someone went pixelated on me, but I think it might have been the drink or something. So you are anyway. But anyway, I'm going to introduce our speaker. He's come a long way. He's come all the way from New York City to be with us today. And some people say you cannot predict the future. Others say, well, actually you can, because you follow the trends and you look at the trajectory of technology. And that's exactly what our speaker does. He tracks trajectories, he looks at trends, and he analyzes how things are being used in the workplace, particularly technologies, emerging technologies. So what I'd like you to do is to give a very big warm welcome for David Kelly from eLearning Guild.
My name is David Kelly. I am the CEO of the Learning Guild. If you are not familiar with our organization, we are a professional development community based out of North America. We focus on learning technologies, the intersection of technology and learning. That's our core value proposition. That's what we do for our community through events and periodicals and such. My role as the CEO is to keep an eye on it. Myself and our programming team, we're always looking at what's going on at that intersection and putting together resources to help people put that information into context. So it's my pleasure to spend some time with you here today to explore that. And I've done this a couple of years. I'm flattered that Don has asked me to come in and give a talk at Learning Technologies. Last few times that we've done this. And each year, I always start myself with the challenge of, well, what's different? What's changed over the year that we want to talk about this year? And learning technologies moves at a certain pace, so that can be a little bit challenging to get into the minutiae of what's different year over year. And as I thought about this year's session, I thought, well, that's not going to be a problem now, is it? That we'll make it a lot easier this year to talk about what's changed. It's been 2 years since we've gotten together. It's wonderful to be back in person and to talk about what's going on at this intersection of learning and technology. We're going to talk about some of the trends, some of the specific technological trends, but more importantly, I want to dive into the context. Because as Steve mentioned, it's difficult to predict the future. I would also argue it's impossible to predict the future. Every person in here, what matters to them about the future of emerging technologies is contextual. And for me to say what's right or wrong with you, for you, without having a conversation with you about the unique aspects of your work, where you work, the environment you're working in, the type of work that you're doing, I would be doing you a disservice. So what we're going to be exploring is some of the we're going to paint the industry with a broad stroke. We're going to look at some of the broad trends, and I'm going to share information with you that I hope enables you to ask the right questions and come to the right answers so that you can decide what the future is learning for yourself. So, with that said, I think we need to look over the last 2 years, talk about some of the context, some of the things that have changed, and what it means for us. And I invite you to be part of this discussion. We will have some time for Q&A at the end, but I prefer, if at any point someone has a question, or if you have a comment that you want to add to it, just shout it out. I'm from New York. I'm used to people who are rude. If you want to get involved in this discussion, just kind of shout it out and interject the question. I embrace the guys. So let's talk about some of the things that are a little bit different. First off, it is a brave new world. What has gone on in the last 2 years has really shuffled the deck in terms of the work that L&D professionals do and how we do it. But I think that that's a critical thing that we need to be looking at here. First off, I think what I've noticed over the last 2 years is the questions that are being asked are not broad enough. We see questions that are being asked around, how do I do what I do in the context of the COVID-19, the context of hybrid workforces, in the context of remote workforces? How do I do what I do? And that's just a small subset of what we need to be looking at, because that question is implying that the needs that we had before are the same needs that we have today, but we just need to do it different. And that's not an accurate representation, because the reality is it's a brave new world for work. The way that we actually work in our departments has changed. Most of us do work in environments where we're supporting people who are doing work. Well, if the way that they work changes, the way that we support their work changes. And I think we need to be very mindful of that as we start talking about the technologies that we're using and how we're using them. And I love this image here. This image, to me, is unintentionally the most accurate representation of the last 2 years. Can anyone take a guess why? It's all frozen. That's a good one. I like that. Specifically, it's like if you look at that screen, there's 6 people on that Zoom screen, but 4 of them are actively talking at the same time. And that to me sums it up. There's always that moment of people talking over each other in a Zoom, and that to me is very accurate. But the world, how we work, has changed. Many of our organizations, if we're hybrid, if we're still remote, we're talking about what it means to get back in the office, and the offices are looking different. The workflow of how work gets done is changing, and therefore, just on that basis alone, the work that we do of supporting people has to evolve as well. We're also dealing with the Great Resignation. This is a big thing in the States. I know it's a big thing globally as well. But we're also dealing with the fact that the workforce itself is turning over at a faster pace. We're talking about, depending on where you're at, the Great Resignation, the Great Reset, whatever sort of marketing term we want to throw at it. But we're dealing with the fact that people are now looking at their jobs differently, and they're changing their jobs differently. What does that mean for the shape of L&D? We have to be looking at that lens as well in the work that we do. This is all adding context. We've also seen some very important conversations over the last 2 years around DEIB. And I'm hoping that that conversation continues and only continues to escalate over the years. And again, this is all changing the culture of the environment in which we work in, which shapes the work that we do in L&D. This is all adding context. This has all happened in the last 2 years. We've had some very tragic events over the last 2 years that have triggered some very important conversations that are talking about how we change the world in general, and specifically our workplaces. And if you're talking about trying to change people's behaviors and trying to change people's views on how they look at things, that's all in our zone of how we support behavior change in terms of how we educate people. And this is a big initiative. This is a big part of the way the world is changing that we need to keep in mind as we look at the work that we do. And then I would also argue that technology's role in work has changed. It's always been an important part of the work that we do, but it's been amplified tenfold. Because now, instead of just being this tool that we're using in a specific context, it's the underpinning of how we interact with one another in a hybrid world. We're using it in ways we've never done before. And technology has always been a major part of what we do, but it has been amplified to an enormous degree. I was speaking at an event that we hosted last year, and someone came up to me, was speaking to me in the hallway conversation. You know, you're always into this technology stuff. And I'm just kind of curious, how do you integrate that into the work that you do? How do you integrate technology into the learning programs that you did? And that was the question. And the only way I could respond was, how have you avoided it up until now? Because the reality is, we talk about learning and technology like they're two separate things, but we live in an increasingly digital world. And how we interact with each other is increasingly digital. And that's only been amplified by the effects of the pandemic. And if that affects how people are interacting and how work is getting done, it shapes the work that we do in our work, in our field. So I share all of that context of the last 2 years because I think it shapes the lens through which we have to look at the work that we do. So when we talk about the technologies, what I want to shift now is talking about some of the specific technologies that are shaping the work that we do, shaping the future of the work that we do. A couple of disclaimers before I jump into this. First of all, I am not by any means saying that this is a complete list. It is an incomplete list by design. I am also not saying just because I talk about something does not necessarily mean it is important to you. I'm painting a broad stroke about some of the things that are changing within our industry. But if I talk about something and I'm talking about it in a near term, organizations are playing in this space now, and you're thinking, wow, we're not even near that in our organization. Or if I'm talking about a technology and I say that this is probably something that's years away from being mainstream and you're integrating it into your work right now, that's neither one of those are right or wrong. You have to decide what's right or wrong for your organization's maturity, for your organization's workflow. So I'm going to be painting it with a brush stroke. I will also be at times getting on my own personal soapbox, and I'll try to make sure you're aware of those particular moments on where my own opinions might be on something as compared to what a broad stroke might be. And the last thing is, I'm going to try to avoid buzzwords as much as I can. Our industry loves buzzwords. I personally hate them. As much as this, in a topic like this that I'm asked to talk about all the time, you would think buzzwords are right at the top of it. I try to avoid it, because the language that we use is really important. I'm a big fan of the ancient philosopher George Carlin. If you're not familiar with George Carlin, he's the American comedian. He said in one of his famous routines that we think in language, and so the quality of our thoughts and ideas can only be as good as the quality of our language. It's one of the reasons I hate buzzwords, because of the way I personally define a buzzword. I define a buzzword as a term whose usage has spread faster than its understanding. And if a term is being used and there's not a shared definition around it, then that term has suddenly become meaningless. So I try to avoid the buzzwords where I can to talk more about it in the context of what these terms actually mean to us. Fair enough? All right, let's jump in and start talking about some of the tech. All right, first thing, and I'm going to try to go through these in somewhat of a chronological order, but again, as I mentioned before, if something I'm talking about in the near term is far off from you, that's fine as well. So, video was big before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit and it just shot up in terms of the usage, because what did we all do in the pandemic? Turned on our cameras. That's where emergency remote teaching came in, where we were just like, oh crap, what do we do? We all turned on our Zoom cameras and training continued, and work continued. And video has just exploded. I think we need to be looking at, it used to be a case of, years ago, the barrier was technology, bandwidth, cameras, and things of that sort. Those barriers have largely gone away for the majority of us in terms of the mainstream usage of video. Now we need to start looking at it in terms of how are we using video? And what are we doing with the video? A big conversation that we see bubbling up a lot more of is, do we need to have our cameras on in every single Zoom meeting? You know, that's a big question of, well, if you don't have the cameras on, how do you know that they're paying attention? You know, well, do you need to have the cameras on all the time? People are uncomfortable. Video is becoming a big thing. I also would say within the conversation of video, not only do we need to be looking at how we're using it, but we also need to be looking at the gaps. You know, video, the percentage of use of video that's being used in our industry right now through live stream like Zoom or any sort of a video conferencing service, that slice of the pie has understandably gotten enormous. And it's our default in many cases of, well, we need to have a meeting, we need to get 100 people together, let's turn on a video conferencing piece of the software. And default, I think, is probably the most dangerous word in our industry, because there are a lot of things that we do by default that we just knee-jerk and do, and we don't think about necessarily how we're doing it. That we just turn on the cameras and that means we're collaborating. And there are a lot of tools that can be used to do things differently that should make things more effective. Good example of what I've been talking about here. How many of you are parents, young kids in school? Good. Round of applause for all of you for getting through the last 2 years. That's not easy. All of us are teachers in some way. But I remember in March 2020, that's when the pandemic hit for us in the New York area. That was when school was happening one day and then suddenly it wasn't. And the school, I give both of my kids' schools credit. They did a wonderful job. And they got through March through the end of the school year. And then in the summer, when we realized that it was going to follow into this next school year, my school, to their credit, or one of my kids' schools, to their credit, sent out a survey. And they said, you know, basically, how did we do? And what could we be doing different? I give them credit for it. And I answered every single question that they asked the same way. Just typed in, it really depends on when you're asking me this question. I'm very popular. So when I got to the last question, I put in, it depends on when you're asking me this question. And if you want to know why I keep saying that, feel free to get me. And to their credit, they did. When you're going through a pandemic where suddenly the ability to do in-person learning has changed and everything needs to be done electronically, the fact that you have the Learning Guild on your business card, you become very popular, especially within your kid's school. So they did give me a call. And to their credit, they said, all right, Mr. Kelly, well, you obviously want to give us some feedback why you keep saying that. And the answer is very simple. I said, if you're asking me this question, if you want me to judge what you did in March 2020, when you were blindsided and the whole world was blindsided, you are getting flying colors. But if you do the same thing in September, when you have full knowledge of what to expect, and you didn't prepare, and you had months to prepare for it, I'm going to give you an F. We are no longer having an excuse to be blindsided for it. We should be planning for this. And I think video is a good example of that. It's not just putting the video cameras on is not good enough. We got to think about how we're using these tools. And if you're using Zoom or any sort of video collaboration tool, most of them have been evolving tremendously over the last 2 years. And they have specific tools that are in play so that you can collaborate and engage people beyond just talking to a talking head. I encourage you to take advantage of those because people are burning out. You know, I feel bad for Zoom because every single term about video conferencing has the word Zoom attached to it, so Zoom fatigue. It's video conferencing fatigue. We're tired of talking to talking heads. And where there are lots of tools that we can use to make video more engaging, and it's a tool that we're using a lot more, but if we don't start using it a little bit more intentionally in terms of how we're engaging with people and how we're talking to people, it's gonna start burning people out and become a less effective tool. So video is a big one. Data. Data is a big one that's there. I love this particular image. I've been using it for a while because it's so simple, but it explains the data thing. We talk about data, and we tend to, the conversation tends to be hijacked around big data, or it tends to be hijacked around the specific metrics that we're using, or the technical components of doing it, and what sort of metrics that we're going to have in the report. And those are all important things, but it misses the big picture. The reason that the data conversation is so important is that it gives us the ability to make data-informed decisions and to have data-informed learning strategies. When you have a better understanding through data of the effectiveness of what you're doing, you can be a better partner to your organization. And there are a lot of tools. There's going to be, you'll see some overlap with some of the technologies that we're talking about, but there are a lot more tools that are emerging that make it easier for us to collect data, make it easier to analyze that data, and make it easier to report on that data and use it to inform our strategies. That all enables us to be a good partner. We come from a history in our industry of reporting really important business metrics like butts and seats and completions and things of that sort, and that's going away. We have the ability to improve the metrics that we're reporting, and we're going to start having the accountability for our organizations to deliver upon it. So we should be tracking what's going on in the data and analytics space so that we can have a more informed strategy in our organization. With that, we're also seeing learning experience platforms emerge. I want to be clear here. There's learning experience platforms, but I would make this a little bit more broad and say whether you're using an LMS, whether you're using LFP, or whether you're using any other sort of platform. I'm talking less about LXPs themselves, although they are still emerging, and more about the functionality of LXPs, the ability for us to create more engaging and more robust learning experiences beyond just delivering courses. Courses are fine, but as I mentioned before, if our default is always there's a learning need, then we have to default to creating a course, we're not doing our jobs as effectively as we could. And LXPs, or even LMSs that are introducing LXP-like functionality, are enabling us to deliver different types of experiences and track different types of learning experiences so that we can have a better understanding, we can deliver more value to our organizations, we can deliver more appropriate solutions to the people that we serve, and we can be delivering more value to our organization. So whether it's an LXP or any sort of learning platform that you're using, you want to look at the functionality that it's delivering, because we're getting more robust functionality to deliver a more engaging and broad experience to people. Next one, workflow learning tools. Now, this one can be a little bit of a hot button for some people. I am intentionally not using the word, there's a couple of, I could have put up here, workflow learning tools, micro-learning, performance support. There's a lot of different labels that I could have given in here, which are all different flavors to the same thing in mind. I avoid the word micro-learning because, I don't like the buzzwords, and I think that unfortunately in our industry, the word micro-learning has been hijacked a little bit. Soapbox moment, I told you I would give you a disclaimer there. Micro-learning is fine, it's an industry topic, it's not going to go away. But where I think unfortunately our industry has missed the boat on micro-learning is because the conversation has been hijacked where the word micro is applied to the content. You know, if I sit one more discussion where it's like, oh, is micro-learning 3 minutes or is it 3 minutes and 25 seconds? Where exactly does it qualify? How short does it need to be for it to really be micro-learning? I'm like, my God, are we really still talking about that? The micro of the content misses the point. The micro of the context is what's really important to me. The understanding of what someone is doing, what they're trying to accomplish, and where they're trying to accomplish it, the more stuff they can talk about that to me was always the power of Microsoft, being able to match the content to where they're doing it, what they're doing, and how they're doing it. And for me, take the label out of the equation, that's workflow learning. That's why I gravitate towards that term myself, because it is more definitional to what it is, finding ways to support people's work in the workflow of what they're doing. When I was 25 years ago, when I was a training director, I didn't know any of these terms. But I would always describe it to my team as, like, how do we do this? We gotta find the least disruptive way to get people what they need. And that's essentially what this is. The difference between now and the fact that this conversation has been going on for decades is that technology has caught up. We have tools that enable us to play in these spaces where people are working. We have devices in our hands, not this particular one, that's not the one I'm talking about. But we have devices in our pockets, we have devices that we use that enable us to give people support contextually while they're doing their job. And these are rising in popularity. More importantly, they're rising in accessibility. And I don't mean that from a DEIB standpoint or a disability standpoint. I mean that more from a standpoint of, there are a lot of tools that are out there. It's like, well, yes, if you know how to go under the hood and code this, you can use this tool. And that leaves it highly inaccessible to a large percentage of our workforce, to L&D professionals. But now these tools are becoming a little bit more WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get type tools where you can just, like using a PowerPoint type tool where you don't necessarily need to code anything. Everything is kind of what you see is what you get. And that makes it a lot more accessible to us. So it makes it a lot more exciting. Next one. Personalized and adaptive learning. This is another one that I get a little hesitancy on. My personal opinion, you'll go downstairs to the expo and there's a lot of great tools that are out there and a lot of great suppliers that are selling wonderful solutions. You'll see the word personalized learning out there a lot. Personally, again, soapbox moment, this is David Kelly, not a statement, official statement from the Learning Guild. I don't think we have personalized learning. Because what we have often right now, we're the definition in practice of personalized learning, it's more about recommendations. It's more about, like, we hear that phrase, I got another one that's supposed to be the Netflix of learning. It's a horrible analogy, because the Netflix of learning means that I'm going to give you things that you might be interested in based on your previous things. It's interest level stuff, not need. You know, if you've ever seen the TED Talk, The Filter Bubble by Eli Pariser, it's a couple of years old, but it's still a very powerful TED Talk. He talks about the filter bubble, where if everything that you're doing, all the different things that you're using, Google and all the different platforms that you're using, it's always like, here's something else you might be interested in. It's giving you stuff that's already within your comfort zone, and that's not where growth happens. Growth happens when we get outside of our comfort zone. So if everything is being personalized in the sense that we're going to give you what you're already interested in, your opportunities for growth are really, really limited. And I think personalized learning, where the tools, all the different elements are there, and I know that there's a lot of companies looking to take personalized learning to the next level. But for me, personalized learning is going to be delivered more on the competency level. And it goes beyond those things. It looks at competency, and it looks at where the growth opportunities are. And it's giving you that opportunity to stretch, not just to deepen your skill and understanding in areas you're already interested in, but giving you the opportunities to stretch in a contextual way. And we're starting to see these technologies emerge. And that's going to be, and we see it both described as personalized and adaptive. I think we still have a little bit of growth there to truly reach the potential of what it is, but it's still emerging, and I think we should be tracking it. And artificial intelligence and automation. This one is another one that I find really interesting in our industry, because people tend to look at technology and the emerging technology landscape of, where are the tools that I'm going to be using? How am I going to be using AI as a tool? And the reality is, I don't think the majority of us in this room are going to be leveraging AI in the sense of, I'm going to do something AI-oriented. However, we're all going to be using AI. We're all already using AI through the tools that we have. It's just invisible. AI is just, it's the underpinning of a lot of the stuff that we do. How many of you have talked to your phone? I don't mean like making a phone call. I mean like asking a question of your phone. Yeah, I see a couple of you doing it. That's AI. That's all AI under the hood that's enabling that seamless thing to happen. And that's where the potential of AI should be. It should be in the sense that there is going to be an invisible technology that, you know, the expression is a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And the first time I talked to my phone and I saw the words appear and it just gave me an answer, it's kind of that kind of a moment of just kind of like, wow, that's really cool. That's how invisible AI should be. The other piece of it that I think is really important is to understand automation from our standpoint. AI is powering automation, and I think that there's a couple of critical things in here. One is understanding how, as I mentioned in the opening, how the world of work is changing. And the more things are automated, the more things that the humans don't need to do anymore, so we can focus more on human value that we're contributing, the more the workplace is changing. And having an understanding of your business and how automation is changing the work that the people that you support do is important. You need to be, if you want to really support your organization appropriately, understanding how that's evolving is important. But more importantly is understanding the work that we do in L&D. There's a lot of stuff that we do today that there are tools emerging that automate the process completely. And we're seeing a lot of those. If you go down to the exhibition hall today, you'll see a lot of tools that automate a lot of the process that we do. For those, how many of you create e-learning courses? A lot of the work that we do in e-learning courses is being automated today, can be automated today through various technologies. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, unless you're not ready for that. But there's a lot of tools that are out there that'll just take a Word document and create an e-learning course out, and get it 80% of the way there from what you would do if you were doing it manually. And we need to understand that there are tools here that are enabling stuff that we do that we feel is a core value proposition in L&D, and it's putting it in the hands of the SMEs, where they can just take their content and get it to where their standpoint is, it's good enough there. And we need to understand that that's happening so that we can focus on, well, if a tool can do 80% of the rigor that I'm doing, where is my value going to be there? And I don't say that in the context of a threat. I say that in the context of an opportunity. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between risks and opportunity in a bit. But I think we need to be tracking artificial intelligence and more specifically automation. Automation is a big one in the context of what's being automated in the work that you do so that you can be ready for that, and what are you going to do in its place. And then immersive learning technologies. This is the last one on my list. I think immersive learning technologies is another big one. I am intentionally avoiding the word metaverse here. I'm not going to use the word metaverse, at least in the context of this. But I would like to avoid it, but I feel like I need to talk about it just in the context of, I think there's a huge amount of risk associated with it. It's being powered by very powerful companies, Facebook and others, that are pushing the narrative of metaverse. You want to talk about a buzzword where there is not a shared definition of what it means. If I asked everybody in this room to define the narrative of what metaverse means, we would probably have 200 different definitions. And there is no clarity around what this idea of the metaverse means. But there is a lot of money behind it because there's a lot of money that can be made. And if you want to know where the real energy behind the metaverse comes from, I'm going to blame my son. My son is 13 years old and he plays a little game called Fortnite. I see many, when I mention something like that, I can always tell who the parents of teenagers are. So like, oh yeah, Fortnite, I know about Fortnite. But kidding aside, Fortnite is a game, Fortnite is a free game that my son has somehow managed to spend hundreds of dollars on, because every single time a skin comes out, he wants to buy it so that his character can wear that skin. Well, so you got a Spider-Man skin, he could swing on vines, he could swing on webs and stuff, no. But he can climb on the walls, no. But what does he do differently? No, it's the same thing, it just looks different. That seems like it's worth 20 bucks. But the reason that, and I bring that in the context of the metaverse, is part of the reason that there's this energy around the metaverse is because the tech companies realize there's a huge amount of money being able to be made through the metaverse. If you have a digital avatar, they're not stupid. They realize that everything that you buy in your real life, your clothes, your glasses, your hats, and all the different things that you feel like are just part of you, you're going to want a digital equivalent for it, and you're going to have to pay for it. So there's a lot of noise around the metaverse conversation that I think is unfortunate, because I do think that in the context of the work that we do, there's huge potential in the immersive learning program. I'm not going to talk about, this is where it gets confusing. I'm not going to talk about the metaverse as we should be following the metaverse, but I am going to say that we should be looking at AR and VR. Those are two very, very powerful technologies that are emerging that can be transformative to the work that we do. VR to me has a very narrow but powerful use case. When you have the ability to give someone the opportunity to practice a skill that in practicality is the risk of failure of practicing that skill is literally life or death, or millions of dollars of failure, then creating a robust simulation where people can practice that in a safe environment, that's enormously powerful. And you'll see some great examples of that downstairs in the exhibition, I'm sure. And then the AR piece is also very, very powerful, where you get these tools that are enabling people to do their work differently. And it's becoming a little bit more transparent about how we're using these tools. I mean, for me, the potential of AR is not in our smartphones of pointing at different things, which is, it's cool and it's very useful, but I still have a device in my hand. When I have a headset on and I'm wearing it, and now my hands are free, I can do something with the overlay that's in front of me and interact with it more. And that has tremendous performance improvement opportunities there. So we should be tracking these two technologies, AR and VR. Just try to avoid getting absorbed into the noise of the metaverse, because there is literally no clarity in terms of what that means, and it's a lot of noise and distraction for it right now. Apologies to any vendors who might be in the room who'd like, we need to go change our marketing material. All right, so those are some of the technologies that I wanted to discuss while we're here. But I think that there's another element to this that I think is really, really important. This is a little bit of a pivot from what I've done in the past. Technologies do not exist in a vacuum. The work that we do does not exist in a vacuum. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about the context. And I think that there's a lot of things that we need to be, if you're going to be talking about emerging technologies and what the potential is and what the opportunities are in our organizations, there are elements of that conversation of what's going on within our organizations and what's going on within the people that we support that I think is critical that we look at. And these are non-technology trends that I think are important, that are contextual to this conversation. The first one is this idea of the rising digital competency requirements. The last 2 years, people in organizations have been forced to play in a digital space that they haven't had to do before. And I'm going to go back to an example of what I mean by this challenge of digital competency. I'm going to go back to the example of my kid's school, when the day after things went online. The school was closed. They sent an announcement saying, based on everything that's going on, the school's going to be closed. We're going to go to hybrid. We're going to go to remote learning, and we're going to send you details. The next day, they sent an email out with the instructions. I give them a lot of credit. They put all this together very, very quickly. And they sent the email out of what you needed to do. How are you going to get your kids online? And I read this email, and I was like, oh, they're going to get so many phone calls. This is going to be really bad for them. Because I'm a tech person, and I read it, and I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand what you need me to do here. But I knew what other people were going to read. And I don't care what words were in that email, and some of you who have kids probably got a similar email from your school. This is what a lot of the parents read when they got that email. Where they were just like, all the jargon was in there, all the different tools that were there. That's what they read, and they were like, well, what is this going to be? When I talk about these non-technology trends, what I'm really talking about is the need for us to increase the empathy that we're showing for people. And this is an element of it here. We have pushed people who are not, I don't want to use any of the stereotypes around digital natives or different learning styles or different generations. All that is bullshit, excuse me. But what I am talking about is that there are people who just don't have a comfort operating in a digital space that have been forced to. There are organizations culturally that don't have an aptitude to adopt digital technologies that have been forced to. And understanding that that is a challenge, someone like myself, I'm just like, ooh, digital, shiny, let me have it. Not everybody is, and most of you in this room, based on the fact that you're engaged in this conversation, are probably in a similar space. Not everyone exists in that space. And we have to be mindful of that and empathetic to those people so that we can, some people are gonna jump on board, other people are gonna need to be coached and they're gonna need to be supported. And we just need to understand that even something as simple as we're gonna get into a Zoom meeting, that there are people out there that are like, I'm tired, I'm fatigued by looking at people's heads. And even being open to something like I mentioned before of the question of, do we need to turn the cameras on? It's just being empathetic to the people who are not as open and as embracing of digital technologies. And we need to be aware that, Pete, there are the foundation of baseline, what does it mean to exist in a digital world and how can I function at work, has been raised because we're in a hybrid environment. People who have not liked it have been able to avoid it, and they can't anymore, and we need to help them along. Next one. The new work environment. We have to be mindful. You know, the environment that people are working in is different now, and we need to be mindful of that. And I think part of it is shaped by just the imagery that we're using. You know, I see imagery like this all the time around the new working environment, where you got a person who's working at a desk and there is Zoom screen. But the reality is that's only part of the environment. We exist beyond, our world when we're working remotely exists beyond the 16:9 screen. This is a more accurate representation of the new working environment, where people are working hybrid, where someone's in a Zoom meeting but their kids are in the room, or their husband is also working remotely is in the background. And we need to be empathetic of this. We need to understand that just plugging in what we've done before may not necessarily be able to be consumed in the same manner because the environment in which someone is working has changed. And we need to be mindful of that as we move forward. We also need to be talking about hybrid learning and equity. I think this is a big one. There could be a whole other session on this. Most of you have probably seen some imagery like this around the difference between equality and equity. It's a very powerful image. It's about the difference between, you know, everyone's going to get the same box as compared to everyone having the same experience on the side. And and that's an image you see online, different versions of it all the time. But in the context of hybrid learning and equities, I want to talk about the one on the right for a second. Just that element here, because this is how we commonly, everyone looks at that and says, well, yeah, it's equitable. But I think this image works really, really well to talk about how we have hybrid learning inequities. Because yes, you've got these people that they all have the same ability to see what's going on in the baseball game, but they're not there. They're not in the stands. They're not on the field. They're peering into it and seeing something that other people are doing. And I think that's a great metaphor for the hybrid learning inequities. Because a lot of the stuff that we call hybrid learning right now is really giving people that are remote the ability to watch what's happening in person. And that is not equity. That is not, I remember one of the times that I walked into my son when he was doing remote class, and I was like, what are you looking at? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, that's like, is that the ceiling? And he's like, oh yeah, the camera in the back of the room moved and they haven't fixed it yet. And nobody was, and I said, did you mention? He's like, no, we'll do it. And that's the type of thing that I'm talking about. We at the Guild, we host conferences all the time. And when the pandemic hit, we had the option, especially when we like last year and when we were in different elements of the pandemic, we had the option of, do we want to offer a hybrid learning environment where we can give people the option of you can participate virtually or you can participate in person. We made a very conscious decision not to do that. We bought a lot of crap for it because we were like, well, I can't go and now you're shutting me out. But we made a very conscious decision not to do that because in my opinion at this point, no one has cracked a hybrid learning. Either it's an in-person thing that the remote people are getting a watered-down version of, and they're just able to watch it. Or it's a virtual thing, and the people who are sitting in a room like this, watching someone on screen who's presenting virtually, thinking, why did I need to be here? I could have done this at my desk. No one's cracked the true hybrid net, because it's not 100% engagement on the virtual side and 100% engagement in the in-person side. You're getting a watered-down version of both, in most cases of hybrid. And that, to me, is why this is really important. How can we, that's one of the reasons we made the decision to just be in person. We're going to do an in-person event, and we're going to focus 100% of our efforts on the in-person experience, and then we're going to do a virtual event separately, and we're going to engage those people digital first. I sort of hand them over. Yeah?
I think there's another sort of inequity.
Yeah.
Zoom Rooms, for instance, participants, where people are actually, the trainer is in the Zoom room, they've got access to everything. They can move around, they can walk. But actually the learners are still stuck on their computers.
Yeah, if you didn't hear the question, the inequity within a Zoom room, that if I'm the instructor in a Zoom room, based on the controls that I have, I can go into different breakout rooms, I can move around. But the learner is stuck. They have no control over where they are. They can't necessarily move around. They don't have that freedom that they had in the past. So that's one of the reasons we've made the decision on our end, is that if we're gonna have a virtual event, it's gonna be digital first, and we're gonna focus on that, and it's just gonna be digital. This is a challenge that our industry has, both in the education space and the corporate space. Of if we're going to be doing hybrid, it's gotta be more than just you get to watch what's happening. And how are we going to find a true hybrid way of doing that? Resiliency, this is another big thing that's come on the last few years. People are tired, people are worn down, and finding ways to support people that we can build their resilience back up so that they can deal with the challenges that are ahead of us. We still have lots of challenges ahead of us, despite the fact that we seem to see light at the end of the tunnel. We just hope it's not an oncoming train. We seem to be on the right end of it, but we have to rebuild our resilience, and that's a big topic for organizations. We're also hearing a lot more about the employee experience. I would tie this to the Great Resignation and the Great Reset, where we're focusing more on giving people focusing on the quality of the experience that people have. This is a broader talent management, HR related initiative for organizations, but it's a major strategic initiative for a lot of organizations. And L&D is a big part of that. I remember the first time, one of the organizations that I started working with, one of the first things they wanted me to focus on was orientation. I was like, all right, how are we doing it now? And they handed me a stack of paper that was like this big. And I was like, how long is orientation? They're like, 2 days. That was not, and I was not thinking about enhancing the employee experience. I was like, man, that sucks. We gotta fix that. There's a lot more effort around this. How can the efforts of L&D professionals and the technologies that we're using support a better employee experience overall? And I think this might be the last one on my list. Upskilling and reskilling. This is another huge conversation for our industry. A lot of organizations focus on this. Again, tied to the resignation and the reset. What are we doing to help people upskill their skills so that their jobs, again, tying it a lot of the overlapping here, as things get more automated, we have to upskill people so that they can be doing the more human-centered work. And reskilling people for jobs that might be eliminated or they are changing roles as part of this Great Reset. Not the best image that I've used. I don't think I've ever seen someone that happy to become a great skill. But still. All right, so we've talked about a lot of the technologies that are out there. There's more that we could have discussed, and I hope if you have any questions we have during Q&A about technologies that might have missed, happy to talk about them. We've talked about some of the elements that are in there, but where are the opportunities? And I thank Don for asking me to add this element. What are the opportunities as we've gone through this? And I think that there are a host of opportunities for us in this industry. We are in a very unique time that we are in. One of the people, when someone asked me in a recent interview, what one word would you associate with the last 2 years? And the word that I associate with it is spotlight. And the reason that I chose that word, partially is because I'm a Broadway fan. And if you're familiar, if you've ever been to the theater, you know that there's that moment in a show where someone's got a solo and everything goes dark. And you just have that one light that goes on that one person so that everybody in the theater is focused on that one individual, regardless of what's going on. Everyone is having the shared experience of focusing on this one thing during this one time. That's online learning for the last 2 years. That the whole world suddenly was like, what do you need to focus on learning? There are parents who were just kind of like, I don't care what online learning is, and suddenly overnight became very engaged in what online learning is. Our industry has been in the spotlight. And that's anytime you're in the spotlight, there's an opportunity to either rise or fall. And that's a huge opportunity for us. So I think but we have to be willing to see what those opportunities are. And I want to go through a couple of opportunities that I see for our industry based on the environment that we're currently in. First one, we have the ability to be more agile as an industry, as professionals, as teams. When you're in an environment that is constantly changing, agility is a requirement. But we talk about, pre-pandemic, we were forced to move quickly and to make decisions in real time and pivot repeatedly in order to adapt to the changing needs of our organizations. And it was a very reactive agility by all means, but we have the opportunity to build upon the experience that we had reacting to the agility to make that part of what we do going forward in a proactive manner. To make it so that we can move quickly, to make decisions, to be able to pivot as need be, rather than just doing the rote stuff that we've done in the past. And I think harnessing the learnings from what we've done in the past, over the last 2 years about how we've pivoted and how we've been able to move quickly is going to be a huge thing for us. There's an opportunity there to have this thing that we were forced to do become something that we are now as an asset that we can carry with us post-pandemic. Within that, we also have freedom to be more experimental in terms of what we do. You know, many of us were pushed to do things we've never done before in the last 2 years. And that's an exciting place to be. It may not necessarily have been in an exciting context, but to be in an environment where you can try something new. How many of you are working for an organization that pre-pandemic, it was, we don't do that here. That suddenly, during the pandemic, it's like, well, we're gonna have to do that here. How many of you were kind of in that environment? I see a lot of hands coming up. Yeah, that's a space that we shouldn't lose. Every organization in some context, metaphorically, we were all a rubber band. And suddenly the pandemic hit, we all needed to stretch. And now that things are starting to be normalized a little bit more, and the triaging around the pandemic is starting to wane, if we just let go of that rubber band and snap back to where we were, that's a huge lost opportunity. We have an opportunity to just try new things and to make these and to find out what new things have value. And to celebrate that within our organizations. I'm sure all of you on some level tried something new during the pandemic and saw value in that. You should keep that as part of your tool set, and you should make it known that we tried something new and we got a new value here. We should be trying new things regardless of what's going on around the pandemic. We created a safe space for us to be experimental, and we should maintain that space as much as we can as we go forward. I also think that around the technologies, there's a skill that I often refer to as conversational competence. My mother would describe it as knowing enough to be dangerous. I don't expect you to know everything. There's so many technologies that are changing the future shaping the future of work. I don't expect anybody to be an expert in all of them. It's impossible, in my opinion, to be an expert in all of them. But you should be cognizant enough about them that if you get a knock on the door from your IT department that says, we're going to be putting in an AI-driven HRIS system that's going to be plugging into your LXP, and it's going to be doing a competency model that's going to be placed across the whole organization, you don't want to get that conversation and be like, that sounds great, just give me 20 minutes to Google everything that you just said. You want to understand the technologies that are shaping the future of our work, and even if you can't apply it today, have enough knowledge that if it was presented to you, you're ready to participate in that conversation. In addition, you may look at a technology like I was talking about data and analytics. You may look at that and say, we are so not in that space in our organization today, I'm not going to pay attention to that. You would be doing yourself a disservice because it may be true that it doesn't matter to the work that you're doing today, but it may matter a lot to the organization you're going to work for tomorrow. So you should be aware of the trends that are shaping the industry as we go forward. And again, at least know them well enough that if it comes up in an interview, if it comes up in the IT department, you're aware that it exists and you can participate in that initial conversation. That's what gets us seats at the table that we've been arguing about for decades. It also gives us the opportunity, the last 2 years have given us a huge opportunity to be more consultative. You know, many of us operating in cultures where we are seen as a training delivery service. And we fight for the right to be more of that performance consultant. And a lot of us have been pushed into, or a lot of organizations have been pushed into a situation where they need us to be more consultative. And again, we want to keep that reputation. We want to maintain the reputation of our organizations that we are performance consultants. We are solution providers, not training delivery mechanisms. And that's a huge opportunity for us as an industry. I also think this is a big one for me, soapbox again. We have the opportunity to reframe the phrase digital learning. I love the phrase digital learning. I hate the fact that it's been co-opted. Because I think we focused more on the wrong word here. When I hear people talking about digital learning, I hear about training through digital tools. That's not the opportunity of digital learning. To me, digital learning, if you're talking about digital learning and you're talking in the context of behaviors that are describing training, you're missing the point. This is about digital learning. This is about what it means to exist in a digital world where you're not even thinking about it. Like, we use jargon like self-directed learning or self-service learning. It's not about that. It's about real-world problem solving. No one has ever been at a dinner party where a question is asked that brings the table to silence. And what does someone break the silence with? I'm going to Google it. I don't know the answer. No one knows the answer to the table stop sign. I'm like, I'm going to Google it. No one in that moment has said, you know what, I'm a self-directed learner. I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm going to find the answer to that question because I'm curious about it. They just solved the problem of not knowing with the digital environment that they were in. And I think that's where the power of digital learning is. We can talk, we have the opportunity through this hybrid environment that we're in to really talk about what it means to learn and exist in a digital world through collaboration, through social networks, through training as well. What does it mean? And talk about digital learning in the context of learning activities rather than training activities. And doing all of these things, we do have a huge opportunity to be seen as leaders in organizations. This slide, admittedly, was originally titled, "We Can Be Seen as Learning Leaders." And the reality, and I talk about learning leadership a lot in the work that I do, and in the context of this discussion, I took off the word learning here, because we shouldn't be seen as learning leaders in terms of the view that we have. In the context of this room, we should all be seen as learning leaders. But in the context of our organization, they just need to see us as leaders. And you do that by being a business partner. They see you as leaders by taking the work that you do as a learning professional and putting it into the context of the business and why it matters and how we're going to solve problems and how we're going to help people do their jobs better. There's a huge opportunity for us to be seen. Many of us have already risen to that through the pandemic by solving the problem and stepping up and helping our organizations do things. We have more of an opportunity to raise the level of leadership that the L&D function has within our organizations. So, as we draw towards close here, how do we do that? There's a lot of opportunity there. How do we harness the opportunities here? And I mentioned earlier my fascination with language. I am a big believer in the power of questions and how questions can shape our thoughts. And the first one, so I'm going to share 3 questions with you that I hope you take with you that can help you find the opportunities that exist in your work and the opportunities that have emerged in the last 2 years. The first one, as simple as it sounds, is what is the opportunity? To sit back and ask that question. Because, and I'm going to be very honest here, there's no question that the pandemic has had huge tragedies associated with it. I lost some people close to me through the pandemic. I'm sure many of you in here did as well. There's no question that there was a huge amount of tragedy associated with the pandemic. But in every single crisis, there are seeds of opportunity. No matter how bad things are, there are opportunities there. You just have to pause and intentionally ask the question, what's the opportunity here? I work for a business that is that a large percentage of our ability to generate revenue is based on our ability to bring massive amounts of people from around the globe to a single location. Not the best industry to be in the last 2 years. But we forced ourselves to look at that and say, all right, well, we're in the business of doing conferences. We bring everybody together. We can't do that. That's going to be a challenge. But what's the opportunity? What's the opportunity that we have? What can we do for engaging people through digital experiences? We do DevLearn. It's one of our big conferences. One of the first decisions that we made, just to set that expectation, is we're not doing DevLearn this year. We're hosting the DevLearn digital experience because it's going to be digital first. What does it mean for us to do a digital first type event? What's the opportunity in doing that? And forcing yourself to ask that question. Yeah, this is challenging. Yeah, it's a lot of weight. But what's the opportunities that exist here? Is a huge element here to just intentionally force yourself to ask that question. Next one. What have we learned through this? We all know in this room that reflection is a very powerful part of the learning process. And I find it very ironic that despite the fact that we know that we're so busy doing what we need to do and moving on to the next project, that we often skip over it in our own work. And just sit back and think about what did we learn? We did a lot of crazy stuff over the last couple of years. And it's amazing some of the band-aids that we threw at the world of L&D just to keep the thing moving. You know, for the first couple of months of the pandemic, the gauge of success was literally, did this thing happen today? And then we've gotten better about, all right, did the right thing happen today? Was it effective? But we did some amazing things. What did we learn? What sort of skills did we develop that we can leverage going forward? Take the time to reflect and schedule it. Make it a priority. You'll be surprised what you learn through it. And the last one is very simple. How can we help? This is not how do I do my job, but how can we help? There are so much in the last 2 years, the skills that I use as an L&D professional over the years have been applied in so many non-L&D contexts that have risen, that have made me, made people in my organization aware of me that would not have been otherwise. But how can we help? Looking at our work through the lens that what can we do to help? I'm a big believer of words. I have a lot of Post-it notes around my desk that are just words, phrases, reminders that are just there constantly. Almost as subliminal reminders that shape the way that I do the work that I do all the time. And it dawned on me as I was putting this presentation together, I looked down at my desk, and there is a Post-it note right at the bottom of my monitor that has been there to the point that it's an aged Post-it note that probably needs to be written. And it's just there all the time. What can I do to help you? And I think if we have that lens through the work that we do, we ask ourselves that question on a daily basis, how am I going to be helpful with it? It's going to serve us really well. There's a huge opportunity. If you want to find the opportunities that are there for you, for your personal career, for your L&D department, for your organization, starting from a place of what can I do to help your organization today? What can I do to help people today? What can I do to help my team today? You'll find the opportunities if you keep asking yourself that question. I hope that the time that we've spent here together has been helpful for you. And with that, Steve, I will turn it back over to you for any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dave, for that. It was a kind of a whirlwind tour, wasn't it? So many different things to unpack there. And I'm sure you've got questions out there you want to pose to Dave. I'm sure he will take questions afterwards as well, because you're on Twitter, you're on various other media as well. So, but let's start off. I'll ask you a question to start, because when we were sat down in the keynote speech earlier on, you mentioned to me, you said, I'd love us to get back to normality. Mm-hmm. But and I know what you meant by that, but I think by the same token, with workplace learning and with all sorts of education, can we afford to go back to normality? No, we can't. Mm-hmm. So how do we avoid going back, drifting back into that old type of style of learning and development? And how can we create an impetus for organizations to go forward?
Good. So a couple of thoughts on that. First off, the new normal is probably on page 1 of my list of buzzwords that I hate. But it's a reality. So when I say I want normality, I mean the absence of triage. Now, right now, I think we've all gone through, we've all gone through a standpoint of we're just triaging just to make sure that things happen.
Dave, are you talking about emergency?
Yes, emergency remote teaching was a big part of that.
Triage,
we heard that phrase where it was at. But there's been a lot of like, how am I going to do what I do given the challenges of this changing workforce? And so when I say the normality, I'm talking about just things settling down enough so that we can focus on the growth opportunities that we're talking about, rather than just throwing Band-Aids on problems. That's the part of the normality that's in terms of, there was a second part. Sorry, I got sidetracked from what you asked.
I think it's about trying to get the impetus to go forward.
Yeah.
So how do we not go backwards? Getting impetus rather than inertia.
Yeah. So to avoid going backwards and that rubber band snap that I was talking about, one of the tools that I try to use all the time is there are a lot of things that we do because we do it because we've always done it. And there are a lot of times that I notice that either in my own work or in a meeting that I do, that even though we're going down a path that's well-worn, and we've done it many times, and we know that it's successful, I'll just throw the question out there. What if we didn't? I know we want to go left. We've gone left 1,000 times, and we know that we'll have proven track record of going to the left. But what if we went to the right? Not to say we're going to go to the right, but just to force people to look at it differently. Just to force myself to look at it differently. To look at it and say, I can play devil's advocate. All right, I understand that this is a good decision, and we've done this many times in the past, we've got a proven record. But what if we tried it differently? Challenge ourselves to not just do things by rote, but to do things because it's the right decision in the right context. It's very easy to fall back into bad habits. And I think that giving those little check marks of just playing devil's advocate or giving a stopgap of just kind of saying, but what if we didn't do it the way that we've always done it? At least gives you the opportunity to make an intentional decision to continue in the direction you're doing, rather than the same knee-jerk reaction that brings you back away from it.
I have a microphone here, a roving mic, and there's one over there as well. So we're going to take questions from the audience. I'll come over this side first. Who has a question for Dave on this side? If not, we'll go across to the dark side over there. Sorry.
Question, comments, anything I said that you disagree?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So you said.
Hold on, wait a minute.
You said that we haven't yet cracked the nut of hybrid working, but have you seen any organisations that have actually got a handle on that nut regarding the hybrid working for people that are
Not really. I've seen some examples where there have been some hybrid events that are better done than others, but I have noticed that there's a direct correlation to how well is it done to the scope. The bigger it gets, the more you start getting that line between this was someone else's, this was more of an in-person experience as compared to a virtual experience. So I haven't seen anything. I'm looking forward myself to going downstairs because I know that there's been a lot of venture capital and money invested in terms of building hybrid solutions. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that is.
There's a question at the front here for one of our under 30 for 30.
Right.
I've got it right.
That's right. So as I understand, when you talked about hybrid, you talked about events that can be attended either live in person or online.
Mhm.
What is your take on hybrid experiences where people attend the same event in person and there is another part of the learning experience that everyone is attending online? Is that different?
Yes, so question if you didn't hear it, I was defining hybrid as simultaneous, that there's an in-person element and there's that. And then what's my take on separating those two? I think that's a great thing if you have the opportunity to do that. For me, that's not a hybrid event. That's an in-person event that is supported by an online event. We could be splitting hairs as to whether or not that is or is not hybrid. But that, to me, that's a better experience because then it gives the attendees and the people creating the experience the ability to say, right now we're focused on the face-to-face event and it's going to be 100% face-to-face oriented. And then we're going to do an online event and we're going to be digital first in that event. And it gives you the opportunity to create those unique experiences.
Do you see
Well,
that? Sorry.
It's for the video.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So do you see that such learning experiences where you have subparts, some of which are in person and others are digital, are working well currently, or do you still see major challenges in like the broader learning experience, not just one event per se?
Yes and no. I mean, the reason I say yes and no is because a lot of that for me, it's less on that particular model that you're describing and more on how that model is applied. A lot of is it effective or is it not is less that model and more how effective was that model done. I mean, if I'm going to have an online experience and the sessions that you're going to attend in that online experience are just a talking head at you for 60 minutes, that's a very different online, even though the model is the same, it's a very different experience where I'm going to have half-an-hour sessions that are going to be shorter and we're going to have interactions, we're going to use breakout rooms so that people can connect with one another and address some of that social stuff. It gets into the how is that online experience created for the effectiveness, less so the model itself.
Over here, Dave.
Yep.
Hi, David.
Hello.
Mine's more of a reflection than a question onto your point around experimentation. I work in consulting. L&D professionals here don't hate me. And I support my client with their learning transformation. And actually, we take experimentation through a different lens, whereby we're not just introducing new technology, but we're actually allowing experimentation in the way that we work. So we use a lot of design thinking to help with the learning that we are creating. And we experiment through launching MVPs, testing them with a learner or somebody from our team. And we actually make a call really early on, would that learning actually work for people? Are they going to take away what we want them to take away? Are they going to take the mindsets and behaviors? So we put experimentation through the I guess, the process and the method that we work, not just bringing the new technology and just letting people run with it and adopt it.
Thanks, Jane. So the other thing that I'd say with the experimentation is that one, probably more than anything else that we have, the culture aspect is big there. And the real opportunity that I see within the experimentation is, when you have a culture where experimentation is accepted, you have a culture where failure is accepted. And not every organization has that culture. That there's if you have a culture of fear, then you don't have a culture that's going to support experimentation. The unique environment that we've been in the last couple of years is the gloves were off, and we had to experiment. And that we have the opportunity to celebrate the experiments that we had and what we learned through that, which can help create the space for experimentation to be safe going forward. Another question.
Yeah, Dave. I applaud you for differentiating workflow learning from the learning experience platforms, but I think we have a huge language problem in our industry where everybody is throwing everything on one pile. So what Josh did with the LXPs is presented them as learning in the flow of work, and others with workflow learning. How do you see that? How do we solve that problem of understanding what is meant with our terminology?
Sure. So I completely agree that we have a language problem in our industry. We're not unique in that, because the reality is we are in an industry like every other industry where there are going to be suppliers who are marketing products and services. And when you have marketing products and services, you have buzzwords and you have people using terms of different things. The biggest thing that I think we have to do on an individual basis and broadly as an industry is to stop looking at the features. To stop looking at what the features say. Because if I looked at a lot of the features that are down there, a lot of them are going to say we support workflow learning or we support different things. And then you look at the how it's being done, and you're like, really? You kind of squint at it, you're like, but really though, are you? And that's marketing. That's marketing 101. So my suggestion of what you can do as an individual to get through that buzz is to not get distracted by the features and focus on the benefits. Ask the question of how. If you see somebody's going to offer it's a workflow learning solution, tell me how it's going to do that for me. What does that look like in practice? And does that fit the context of how you define it in your organization and how you plan to leverage it? I hope that helps.
We've got time for just two more questions. We've got one here at the front.
Hi, David. First of all, great presentation, by the way. I really liked your comment on personalized and adaptive learning around how today it's just really based off of interest, right? What are you interested in? I'm going to show you something based off of that. I do believe, though, through technology, there is an opportunity to look at how you can create a personalized learning experience based off of not only what they know, but what they don't know to fill the gaps in, right? So taking that adaptive layer to the next level. Is there anything that you've seen in this space that you've looked at and thought, actually, this is pretty game-changing? There's a massive opportunity.
The opportunity, yes. I haven't seen a plug-and-play thing. And side note, if anyone ever wants a recommendation on this, I'm happy to talk privately in context of standing on this stage and saying, yes, you should use XYZ product, that would be bad for you. But what I'm excited about from the opportunity standpoint is the bones are there. So for instance, when I talk about personalized learning, I'm wearing an Apple Watch. And the second that I clasp this device and put my code in, it knows that it's me. It is essentially verified this is David Kelly. And not only can it accept information, but it can be broadcasting a verified signal that David Kelly is nearby. So what does that mean? I can walk up to a piece of equipment, it picks up the Bluetooth signal here and says David Kelly is here. That system, which is now connected to the Internet of Things, goes out to the HRIS system and it recognizes David Kelly's about to use this piece of equipment. What's his competency level that he has? It finds out that information, it comes back, and now as I'm using it, the system is responding to me with an appropriate layer of support based on my competency within that system, within using that piece of device. No, there's nothing that I'm aware of that you're going to go downstairs that's going to deliver that solution, but all of the individual components necessary to deliver that exist. It's just not packaged yet.
David, you mentioned earlier on about how you said that you wanted to go back to normality, right? That everyone's normality is different from a learning perspective. You've got baby boomers, millennials, Gen Z, all in the workforce at the same time. You talk about this great reset. how do we use emerging technology to push that innovation whilst not leaving people behind, and also, you know, being at the forefront for those Gen Z and even the next generation?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is I know that there's a lot of marketing value behind it. I personally find the labels that we associate with ages a distraction. I know many people in their 80s who can use technology better than people that I know in their 20s. I find it to be a distraction. And we talk about digital natives and things of that sort. I find them all distraction. Regardless of what age people have, there are going to be people who have a natural aptitude and interest towards these things, and they can come to these things very easily, and there are going to be people who resist it on some level. And we have to find ways to not leave those people who are resistant behind. The ones on the far end, regardless of who they are, the ones who are like, yeah, digital first, give me this stuff, I'm really happy and I love to play in this space. We don't have to worry about it. They're gonna be your champions. We have to find the people who are being left behind, make sure that we're not delivering things that they're left out. They're getting a watered down solution. And part of that for me is just one example. It is finding those people who are champions and finding ways for them in some way to be the mentors to the ones that have it. There's a change management piece to that. There's a lot of elements to it on how do you get people who are resistant to change and digital change on board with a lot of this stuff. That we could do a whole other session on maybe next year. But I do think finding the opportunity to connect the ones who have an aptitude for it and have a passion to share with the ones who don't is a great way to get people into the organization.
David, thank you once again for everything you've done this morning. You always bring something new to us. You always make us think hard as well. So please show your appreciation for David.